Hi and welcome to this series where I'm going through the ITIL 4 practices individually, and I'm going to be giving you the headline points you need to be aware of, all in order to build your knowledge, your base knowledge around ITIL 4. I'll also be discussing some of my real world application of these practices in various organisations I've worked in. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and click the bell for those updates. Okay, so let's get to it. Today I'm going to be covering off release management from the service management practice. A reminder what a practice is: it's a set of organizational resources designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. Worth pointing out, ITIL 4 moves the emphasis and the focus on practices into the organisation, into the company, to implement specific processes that are going to work in their specific ecosystem, in their environment, what's going to work in their organisation and deliver the needs to their customers. There's three types of practices: general management practice, service management practice, and of course the technical management practices. So let's start off with the terminology starter for 10 around release management. So the purpose of release management in ITIL 4 is to make new and changed services and features available for use. Definition of a release: it's a version of a service or a configuration item, a CI, or a collection of configuration items that is made available for use. You'll hear the word release plan and release schedule. The release plan contains the makeup set and the steps for the new service, or indeed a change service, and the timing of that release. The release schedule, that's used to document the timing. The timing of the release shouldn't be done in isolation. You want to be speaking to your stakeholders, to your customers on this one. Make sure it's a good time for them, not just you. Good example of that is that I've worked in an organization where the service provider pushed forward a release, and it was for a financial system, and it was at month end. And in fact, I think they tried to do it at year end as well, which wasn't so great. It was great timing for them as a service provider. It wasn't so great for us as a customer. Likewise, I think if is a good time to do a release to a payroll system just before payroll's about to run. There are cases where it has to be done, perhaps there's a security issue or something equally critical, but just think about that release schedule. When is a good time? Couple of case in points I can think back to my experience. Doing a release at month end or at year end to a financial system is not a good idea. Neither is releasing anything payroll related when the payroll is about to do a run for everyone's pay. Another terminology you may hear is blue-green deployment, and it's an application release model. It gradually shifts traffic from one location into another. So from a previous version of an application, as an example, to an almost copy of it, an identical new release, but they're both running in the production environment. Blue-green releases are used to mirror two production environments, is perhaps the best way to look at it. And there's a switch, there's a network, there's some networking, clever tooling that can be used to point people in the new direction. Key point to remember here around release management practice: it's not just one change. A release can be many changes that are packaged up into a single release. So while we may say a release, key point there is actually there's going to be lots of changes within that. They've been packaged up. Scope for release management: it can be far, it can be wide. We're talking infrastructure, we're talking applications, training material, development material, documentation, tooling, process material. They can come from a variety of sources as well. It can come from your own internal dev team. It can come from third parties, service providers, service integrators in some cases, vendors, offshore development teams, the location and the scope can be far and wide. They also, to add extra complexity into the mix, they come in all sizes and all complexity levels. Take your pick. You can have small, you can have medium, you can have big, you can have simple, quite complex, really complex, or you can even have a brand new service, a brand new shiny service. I suppose the point there really around release management is the scope can cover lots of different areas, your infrastructure and your apps. It can come from lots of different resource locations, development teams, third parties, offshore dev teams, and the complexity of them, small, medium, complicated, not so complicated. Other key point that's worth remembering around release management is that once it's out in the open, once you've released it, I don't see enough of people then looping back into customers and to stakeholders to find out, is all good? Is everything as expected? Are people satisfied? There's some really, really useful post-implementation material here that doesn't always get maximised. I think there's perhaps a little nod to it in terms of, is everything all right? But really, is the customer really satisfied? Let's move on to a couple of types of release management for discussion. So we've got the traditional waterfall and we've got agile and DevOps type approaches. So if I look at waterfall first of all, and I've been in IT circles for a good 25 years, and a lot of my background in historic organizations has been involved in waterfall type activities. So these are, it's usually, there's huge activities around design, build, testing, training, and a lot of that work all goes into a major deployment, and it's a big fanfare, it's a big activity. It's a historic approach. You create the release, you phase it up into steps, into sections, and then you deploy the solution, and off we go. The release is the build and the test and the packaging of everything. Typically, it can be spanned over quite a long time. So you are talking, in some cases, weeks, but it's usually months. And in some organisations I've worked in, it's broken down into quarters, Q1, Q2. It's not exactly great when you're looking to respond to quick, snappy, iterative type fashion customer requirements. When you do a big deployment, it's not unusual that there are things that don't go quite as planned. So maybe there are issues. Coordinating that, looping back, going back and fixing those items can be complex, can be time consuming. It can be a large task. Think, as an analogy, think of an oil tanker at sea, and it's steaming along, and then in order just to change 1 degree, it can take miles to change that course. So if we look at waterfall in terms of an environment, you have your release plan, and that's your new or changed infrastructure, new or changed software, maybe training and documentation. Then you go into your deploy and release, and then review. Q Agile, Q DevOps. Okay, so more recently, Agile DevOps type approaches and an environment will show it's much more flexible. It suits more frequent releases, more iterative type activities. So smaller, more frequent releases. There's release management activity after deployment. Definitely suits an iterative approach. Smaller pieces of work, adjust accordingly for that correction. It's much easier to have a QC and a QA, a quality control, quality assurance over smaller releases generally. If we go back to my analogy a moment ago about if the waterfall analogy is an oil tanker, and to change course it takes miles. Think Agile, think DevOps as a small agile boat. It's able to tack, it's able to adjust in a fraction of the time and distance. In the DevOps environment, release management typically is integrated with the continuous integration and continuous delivery tool chain. So in the Agile and DevOps environment, you'll have your release plan, you'll have your new or changed infrastructure, new or changed software, training and documentation. Then you've got the deploy, then you've got the release, then you've got the review. So let's go back to the service value chain activities. Reminder, service value chains at the center of the service value system, where you have your guiding principles, your governance, service value chain. You have your practices, there's 34 of those practices, and the continual improvement all going into value. The service value chain it's those activities that I always remember as PIDOD as a way of remembering. So you've got plan, improve, engage, design and transition. You've got obtain, deliver and support, all going into your products and your services that you're delivering to your customer that will provide that value piece. So maybe you've guessed, but in the release management practice for the service value chain activity, it's involved in all of the activities, but especially that design and transition activity, as you might imagine. So it's ensuring new or changed services are made available in a controlled way. Okay, so final parting thoughts, I guess, things to think about, things to ponder on. Consider which approach is going to work best in your organization for release management. Is it the traditional waterfall environment, or is it a more agile or DevOps environment? Also, with the introduction of cloud, how does release management work in the cloud? So that there are a number of cloud features that works with the ITIL release management practice. So if I think of the Amazon AWS, there's Elastic Beanstalk, and that enables blue-green deployments. So it reduces the release management burden, if you will, where it brings a much higher level of automation capability, and you can roll releases forward and you can roll releases backwards, and there's a high level of tool integration, integrated development environments, IDE, for your production environment. And it's able to decouple, it has decoupling capabilities to reduce the scope and the size of each release. Think about pilots as well. So when you're doing a release, consider a small subset of people, perhaps people that are kind of IT friendly, if you like, or people that are going to give you honest feedback and you know, are from different areas of the business. Don't just think, oh yes, I'll just do these people because we know them. Think about the business area overall. It would be sensible to have perhaps somebody from accounts, somebody from renewals, somebody from customer service, somebody from marketing. Don't just focus in, you know, your pilot release. You need to have a good small set of a cross section of people within your organization as that release goes through. And then finally, each release is described by a release on a ITSM tool, and release records are linked to the CI and the change record, so you've got good levels of information and documentation and knowledge generally about that release. Okay, thanks for listening. Please subscribe, hit the bell and get the updates. That's the end of the release management practice.